Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for taking a few minutes to be with us. I see some familiar faces who have joined us again here in Memphis. My name is Chelsea Crawford, Chief of Staff at the Tennessee Department of Education. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that we have an ASL interpreter here. We also have a Spanish language interpreter, should there be anyone who has a need for those translation services. We've got someone here who can service us. But very excited to welcome you to the public town hall that the department is hosting to talk about a very important issue and a piece of legislation that we will be implementing later this fall for the very first time. We are actually going around the state to hear from Tennesseans like you, your input on how to begin to co-create a calculation for letter grade system for our schools. When we think about report cards that students receive and bring home from classrooms, they get letter grades A, B, C, D, F in a subject matter area. Similar to that, we have a piece of legislation that was passed a number of years ago that will implement the same type of letter grades, A, B, C, D, F, at the school level. Really, as we move forward to implement this legislation for the very first time, we are seeking input from folks like you, as I mentioned a little bit earlier in my comments. And I want to make sure to invite all of you who are attending today to contribute to the discussion this afternoon. You can talk about particular pieces of input or thoughts or considerations that are already on your mind. You can kind of ask questions that may or may not be considered. You can ask questions that may be considered in the conversation that might not yet be kind of a fully formed thought. All of that is absolutely okay, welcomed, and encouraged. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that. The other thing, if you would like to sign up to speak tonight, which is the entire reason we are here, please take a look at the screen up here. There's a QR code where you can sign up electronically to kind of say your piece, but you can also just feel free to raise your hand while we're here this afternoon, and I will bring a microphone over to you just to ensure that everyone can hear your comment and participate in the conversation. Before we get to the component of public comment on this particular topic area, I want to give us just a baseline understanding of the topic we are here to talk to you about and hear from you about, which again is that letter grade legislation. So going kind of to this slide, I wanted to make sure first and foremost to say our goal at the Department of Education, and certainly our districts and schools all across the state, is to provide children with a high quality education. And we know that parents and families look for information on how schools are doing, and that's intended to be this letter grade system is intended to provide parents and families kind of a rating system, information that they can use to understand school performance, school success, how to engage not only in their students' education and supporting them to learn and be all they can be, but also supporting success across the schoolhouse community. So as I mentioned, there was a piece of legislation that was passed a number of years ago. We are going to roll it out for the very first time this fall. I'm going to put a timeline up here for you all to kind of take a look at, but what you see here is that in 2016 there was a law that was passed intended to be implemented in the 2017-2018 school year. But we have not yet been able to implement that legislation because we had a number of years where TCAP data actually was kind of off limits for use in rating systems like this. If we think back to a handful of years ago, there were some testing administration issues when it came to Tennessee Ready, and data was off limits for that period of time. We moved forward just a couple of years ago. We remember the pandemic quite clearly. During that time, some of the data that we used to look at school performance was similarly off limits. Now we are in a situation where the data is not off limits and is really ready to be rolled into implementation of this law that was passed a number of years ago. So again, why we are here in Memphis. This is the second night we've been in Memphis. We had a town hall yesterday at Bartlett High School, heard a lot of really good input from folks in the community, but we're here to hear from you. We want to make sure that we are bringing folks to the conversation, that they are able to contribute input to help us build a system together. So as we move into the public comment period, I want to give just a brief example of the kinds of things that could be included in a letter grade calculation. Again, if we think about schools later this fall receiving an A, B, C, D, or F letter grade on the state report card, what are some of the components that should inform the calculation of that letter grade? I mentioned this is a piece of legislation. The Tennessee General Assembly put this into effect, and there are 3 components in that legislation that guide our discussion here tonight. The first is proficiency. You will see that up here on the slide. It's got the star icon next to it on your left-hand side of the screen. But we really are focusing there on proficiency in subject matter at a particular grade band. So we think about academic standards in Tennessee. Our teachers come together to develop rigorous standards on what we would expect a student to know in a particular subject area in a particular grade level. Proficiency measures how well those students are mastering the particular standards as laid out for that subject or grade level. So proficiency is one thing that the legislation requires must be included in the calculation for letter grades. The legislation also requires that the calculation include growth. Growth is different from proficiency, but it actually measures the improvement. And so when you think about an individual student who is growing and learning and definitely improving in terms of their ability to access great instruction, understand, absorb great instruction, so too may a school grow and actually improve kind of the performance there. So growth is the second consideration from the legislation. It must be required in the calculation. There is a third component, and the legislation calls for other indicators as determined by the Department of Education, which is, of course, the agency that we're representing here tonight. And those other indicators is really up for a lot of input and debate on what should be included. When we think about measuring success or performance of a school, there are a couple other things that we have thought about previously and historically that could continue in this conversation, really determined by the public comment that we are collecting via these town halls and other engagement opportunities. Chronic absenteeism is one. On the screen here, you see chronically out of school, and what that refers to is children who are not able to access as much quality instruction within the course of a school year calendar, right? They're out of school for too much time, and chronic absenteeism is one of those components that could be included. Of course, when we think about chronic absenteeism as a data point, it might feel a little dense, but in the practical application, we know that students are going to do great when they are in front of a teacher and receiving great instruction. When they are not in the schoolhouse or in the classroom, we know that they can be adversely impacted. English language proficiency down at the bottom is another indicator that could be considered as part of our conversation when we think about students who are English learners. They are just now learning the language and mastering the language to then be able to interact with content and curriculum and wonderful subject matters according to Tennessee standards and grades. But that certainly has an impact on students' ability to grasp content, become proficient, or grow. So those are some of the indicators that we've thought about previously that could continue in this conversation or could not, really depending on how this public engagement informs our discussion moving forward. The other thing I want to make sure to call out is actually other indicators that could be applied for a particular type of school. So you think about elementary school students versus middle school students versus high school students. When we think about success at a school level, we might have very different preferences, priorities, perceptions of what should matter in an elementary school, should matter in a high school scenario. Those could look different. And so on your slide here, on your right-hand side, you're going to see a couple of examples that could apply at the high school level. Graduation rate is certainly one that we've thought about in the past that could inform a calculation for a letter grade. When you think about graduation rates, the number of students who are successfully graduating at a particular school, that is one indicator that could apply at a high school that wouldn't necessarily be as applicable for a middle school or an elementary school. There is another opportunity to take a look at Ready Graduate. It's how ready are those students to move on to their next step after high school graduation and be successful, whether that's they're going on to college, career, military, some other pathway. But that kind of readiness indicator is something that could apply in a high school scenario that may look different and be less applicable in a middle or elementary school space. When we think about elementary schools, our department and our state has focused a lot on early reading and literacy rates at third grade markers. That's an example of the kind of things that we could consider in that elementary school space. Of course, when we think about middle school, there are all kinds of things we can think about. So I really wanted to take this moment to show you a slide of the kinds of things that could be included, could be considered. But this is not exhaustive, this is not comprehensive, and absolutely none of this in terms of the other indicators is final. That's the kind of thing we really want to hear from you tonight about, because as I mentioned, we know that proficiency must be required in a calculation that will generate A through F letter grades for schools. Growth must be required, but we want to hear from you a little bit about your preferences, prioritization, and those other indicators that could or should be applied as we move forward to implement this legislation. So as we move into this period of public comment, I mentioned that you are welcome at any point in time to sign up using the QR code that's on the slide. It was on the check-in table when you came in this afternoon, so you may have already signed up. But if you would like to contribute your input, feel free to jump in and sign up using that QR code. You can also raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone over to you just to ensure that everyone can hear your comment, hear your question, and participate in the discussion here this evening. Up here on this slide are some questions that can kind of prompt your thinking. This is, again, not exhaustive or comprehensive, but it's the kind of considerations that we're interested to hear from you about. What are your top priorities? When you kind of take us forward to a place later this fall and a parent or a family member, a community member, a taxpayer goes onto a website and sees, Central Elementary A, and they see the principal's name and the address of the school and all kinds of information about the wonderful kids that are there. You will also see a letter grade. It may be A, B, C, D, or F. What are the kinds of assumptions that parents and families might make associated with a particular letter grade? How do we actually begin to develop a letter grade system that conveys meaningful information to parents and delivers to them the kinds of information, the kind of rating on things that they want to know about? So what are your top priorities when it comes to measuring a school's success? How should we measure progress towards those priorities? When we think about the letter grades, what do we believe or what should those letter grades represent? How would you define what each school should provide to students to receive the letter grade listed? So those are just some of the types of questions that we want to throw out here to prompt your thinking. But I will be very clear, there is nothing off limits tonight. We're really interested in hearing good ideas, questions, concerns, considerations that can inform the discussion that will move through the fall ahead of implementation of this legislation. So we're going to move now to the public comment period. I hope you all are signing up or getting ready to raise your hand to contribute. The way that this is going to work is everybody's going to have a couple of minutes to say their input. I'll have a timer up here on my phone so we can hear that and kind of keep everybody on track. What I will do, I'll ask that you state your name, provide your input. When you do that, I'm going to step away from the podium. And when your timer starts ticking down and you've just got a little bit of time left, I'm going to step back up to the podium. That'll be kind of a visual cue for you that your time is just about to come to a close and the next person should be ready to go. And you'll hear the timer go off when it's time for your turn to end. So at this point in time, we want to move into that public comment period. I know we have one individual who signed up first, and that person is Brian Curry. So Brian, if you would raise your hand, please, sir. Yes, sir, we see you. We're going to bring a microphone over to you. I'm going to start your timer. Don't forget to introduce yourself. You're ready to go.
Okay, good evening. My name is Brian Curry. I serve on the Germantown Board of Education. I'm the legislative liaison for our school board. First off, I appreciate y'all coming and doing the tour of the state. I think it's meaningful that you're here, and so I appreciate the opportunity to provide input. I think just a couple of questions just from a board member's perspective as we look at this. I understand that there was a lot of work done back in the 2018 timeframe, a lot of town halls that were done on this, a lot of work. My understanding is about 2 years of work that went into this formula previously. So I'm not sure why we're not using that to determine the scores from this past year and then work on modifying it going forward. It almost seems like we're trying to change the rules of the game here after the game's already been played. And so I think a lot of work was done. I think we ought to honor that work, apply it to this past year, and then as we go forward, what metrics are going in, because certain things may have changed since 2016 to 2018. Maybe we're putting more of an emphasis on ready graduate, or maybe that we weren't during that time. I came on board in 2020, so I wasn't involved in the discussions, but just looking at some of the metrics there. But I guess from a couple of concerns, when we were looking at the slide previously, I think there's an opportunity maybe to consider ACT performance at the high school level. I think maybe if you're looking for something to look at, that might, as we go forward, I think that might be something to look at as well. Growth, though, is a concern. Our district, a lot of hard work has gone in, and our educators and families, we've worked, so we're at 80% for third grade literacy, which leads the state. But our growth, it's going to be very hard for us. We've got a goal to go to 90. That's going to be astronomically tougher than it was going from maybe 70 to 80. So as you try to get that last little bit, so our growth, we might go from 80 to 81% or 80 to 82, but we shouldn't be penalized, because it's hard at that point to try to get that extra percent or two, where a district, and they should be given credit if they go from 20 to 45 or 20 to 50. That's 30%. That's huge growth. That should be recognized. So that should be recognized, but I just don't want the growth to be so heavily weighted as we go forward, because again, every district's going to be different, and just because we might only have a 1%, that doesn't mean that our educators aren't doing the work, and we certainly don't want to be penalized for that.
Oh, yes, sir. Those were very thoughtful comments. You got about 20 more seconds if you had anything else to say.
Oh, sorry. And I guess the only other thing is, I want the intent of this grading system to be the true intent, to really get us a gauge of where we are. We've heard lawmakers say that they want the deck stacked here to where the schools show for performance. That way it opens the door for vouchers, and we certainly don't want that. So we want it to be fair and a true indicator of district's performance.
Very good. Thank you so much, Mr. Curry. Others who want to comment tonight, feel free to raise your hand. Yes, ma'am. I see you right here. We're going to bring you a microphone. If you would please state your name, you're good to go ahead and get started.
Good afternoon. Angela Whitelaw, Memphis Shelby County Schools, Deputy Superintendent of Academic Schools and Leadership. So just as my colleague, I think, at Germantown, a couple of things, though, that ring out for me. Just as probably, and I see this across the state, while some people want, some school districts, rightfully so, thinking about growth and thinking about academics, but I also want it to be fair for those schools based on the students that we serve, that our students are recognized for their growth. So as we continue to get this right, I think it is, so I do also agree, thinking about things we've already talked about. So how do we keep true to those things that we've done so that people can buy into the system, that is not being designed to hurt, but being designed to inform parents and to push us to that next level. So those are just a couple of things that I'm thinking about, especially for us, as we are a growth, our goal is to grow students so we can definitely then achieve. Not saying that we don't want to be measured by the same criteria points, but I do think that there are always two sides to every story. So I just want to make sure that that's brought out and thought about as we continue to look at it. And then, too, I think my question would be, I think it was one of your questions as well, what are we hoping to gain as we label our schools A, B, C, D, F, and then, because there are so many different labels. One, level 5, another one, we have this label, then we have reward school, then you have the priority schools. So we got a whole bunch of labels. So how does that all lump up into this grade Because we know that a school that's a level 5 could also be on the priority, also in the bottom 10%, may not in the bottom 5. And then we also know that a school that is at the very top may not be the reward school. So just thinking about how do you really represent, since there are already so many labels that exist in our state.
Thank you very much for your comments, Dr. Whitelaw. I think I saw another hand. Oh, yep, I see you. We're going to bring you a microphone. If you would please introduce yourself. You're ready to get started.
Okay, Myrtle Winfield, manager of community schools with Memphis Shelby County Schools. So I wanted to say, when our parents are looking at the schools and the scores, how can we make it more understandable for our parents so that when they see an F or D, it's not stating being able to give a full picture of what that is. So if there are some things that we can highlight, let's highlight it. It may be that that school is an A in this area. It may be that it's a B in this area, and then it's the overall. But making it more understandable for our parents, they may be walking away from schools that are saying overall F, but they're really still good schools, and it may be they're an F because of when they add in discipline or attendance, and our parents may not understand. So making it easy for our parents to understand that even in their neighborhood, wherever they are, there are good schools that they can choose from.
Thank you very much for your comments. I'm going to check our spreadsheet just to see if there are others who have signed up online, but anyone else in the room want to speak, you can go and shoot your hand up right now while I pull this file together. Yes, sir, we're going to bring you a mic. If you would please state your name. You are ready to go ahead and get started.
Thank you very much. Gary Lilly, Superintendent of Collierville Schools. I agree with her comment as far as being transparent. I know that the A through F grading is sometimes the reasoning for it is given as transparency, but in my opinion, just a straight letter grade is not that transparent. So I would urge you to make, I know that the letter grade is legislatively mandated, but my comment would be to make it very easy for parents to drill down so that we can see exactly all the metrics and how that they, the formula for coming up with that letter grade, because the metrics are very different. That, all those that are up there are very different. So to combine them all into a single grade, I think is not as helpful as providing each of those metrics and the results of each one.
Thank you, sir, for your comment. And I'm hearing a common theme here. Actually, I'm very excited to just acknowledge, I think we're actually all on the same page. We want it to be an understandable thing for parents so that they can kind of drill down and see what makes this up, for example, at an elementary versus a middle versus a high school. I'm interested to hear what we think should make up the calculation of that letter grade. When you think about if we can drill down and see just exactly what those things are, what do we believe those things should be? So another kind of way to think about it, another kind of prompt to hear your input. Others who want to provide public comment, feel free to go ahead and raise your hand. We'll bring you a microphone. I want to make sure that we're giving you an opportunity to think a little bit, just like teachers provide thinking time in the classroom. Others who want to contribute input. I see you. Yes, ma'am, we'll bring, you want to say something again? We'll hand you the microphone.
Maybe student voice, student opinion. So what are the students saying? That could make up part of it. What are the parents saying? So maybe we could have representation from student voice and parent voice to go into the overall calculation.
Thank you very much for that input. Yes, ma'am, I see you down here. We're going to bring you a microphone just so everybody can hear you. If you wouldn't mind, please state your name, then go ahead and get started.
Angela Hodges, advisor of family and community engagement. I was going to say controllable variables. A lot of times we calculate things that aren't controlled, some things that the schools cannot control. We want them at school every day, but there are extreme circumstances that will not allow the students to come. And so we are held accountable for extreme circumstances or variables that we cannot control, even if we go to the house and pick the student up. An elementary kid can't bring themselves to school, but a high school kid can catch a ride to school. or someone can provide transportation. So there are variables that we are held accountable for, but unfortunately, we are given a strike for that, you know. So maybe some controllable variables that we can look at and things that we can look at, including that.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you have any specific controllable variables, we'd love to hear it. I see you, ma'am. We're going to bring you a microphone. We'll tag onto that one. If you would state your name, go ahead and get started.
Good evening, Janice Tanks, an Instructional Leadership Director with Memphis Shelby County Schools. Just like I do agree, ACT is important, but not everyone goes to college. So why not look into kids who are getting certification through CCTE or hours through it, but why not go that avenue also? You know, I think we need to be well-rounded when we're talking about letter grades of schools.
That's really, really thoughtful input and actually consistent with some things we've heard elsewhere in other town halls, and I'll say the same for kind of the absenteeism comment that came right before. Yes, ma'am, I see you. You're jumping in tonight. Can we bring you a microphone? I thought you, oh, did you, oh. Okay. Let's hear it. Let's hear it.
She was asking about the scores, the cut scores.
I was going to tell my sister, thank you so much. My voice is gone, so please forgive me. I'm Tamika Elsie, assistant principal at Hickory Ridge Middle School, and I was thinking about, as we're working so hard to get our students prepared for the next grade, even getting them prepared for high school, oftentimes it's very difficult for schools to really prepare for it when the cut scores are actually determined after the fact. So how do we really, I know we have like the percentages and saying, all right, your state has said that you need to do this, or our district has stated what we need to do here, but determining the cut scores after the test is already given, it tends to leave some uneasy feelings about how are those scores really, how do you determine the cut scores? And why isn't that information provided up front? Why do we wait till after the test, say 80% of the students scored at 80%, 70%, oh, now it's gonna be 90%. So how do we, as a state, go ahead and be upfront about what the cut scores are so that when schools are actually working toward achieving the academic growth and work towards achieving these high measures, we know up front what it is. There's no hidden agenda, there's no hidden mystery around it, if that makes sense. So as we're thinking about letter grades, let's think about being upfront as a state on the cut scores so that we'll know this is the mark that we need to make in order to show this type of thing or that thing as it relates to academic and growth.
Thank you very much for those comments. I appreciate it. Your voice sounded great to me. You jump in anytime you want to. Others who want to comment here, feel free to raise your hand. I'm going to check my spreadsheet here in just a minute. But others in the room who are having thoughts after the discussion we've had thus far. We've heard a lot of oop, there goes somebody's timers. Oh, yes, sir. Okay, we're going to bring you a microphone, Mr. Curry. Go ahead.
Thanks. And the point was brought up, and I think it really needs to be heavily reinforced. Our parents have to be able to know, without having an educational background, what an A is versus a B versus a C. Because I know when you look at TVOS, for instance, and I'm in the world of, as a board member, but even I have to go back and really try to understand TVOS. And so for, a parent that's maybe not into that world, they send their kids to school, maybe they're on the PTO, but trying to explain TVOS to them, just using an example, that's all scientific calculation, trying to get that figured out. So whatever we do, I think it's got to be easily understandable by our families that this is what an A is, this is what a B, and that anyone, regardless of your background, can look at it and understand. I think that we owe our families that.
Very good. Yes, sir. I'm hearing lots of dittos across the room today. Others who want to provide comment or question, considerations for us to carry forward. We've heard a little bit about controllable factors, things that are kind of within a schoolhouse or a teacher or a principal, school families control. What are those types of metrics that could be included? We've heard a little bit about kind of the high school space and the indicators there and readiness for career or college or other kind of indicators. Yes, ma'am, we're going to bring you a microphone. It's on your left-hand side. Please go ahead and get started.
Angela Whitelaw, MSCS. Just a couple things I'm thinking about as well as I think about the accountability system. And I don't know actually where this lives, but I think as we think about trends, because I think for a letter grade for parents, if a school is an A one year, a C another year, a D another year, a A, I think it's real hard for parents to really understand how that school is actually functioning. So I'm just thinking about how do we look at trends across the state, across each school district and across each school, and how does that fit into our accountability system, or where could it live? That's the only thing that I think about as we're communicating with parents. I don't want parents to make a mass exit for a letter grade, but then the same thing, I don't want people to enter a place that may not have a trend of really creating this place for academic achievement. So it's on both ends.
Thank you, ma'am. Very thoughtful. We've heard that from a couple other folks in a couple other town halls too. It's kind of the concept of how have we done historically? How can we account for kind of the few years or a handful of years of effort in a letter grade system? Others who would like to provide some input, feel free to raise your hand. Yes, ma'am. We've got a microphone right in front of you.
If we could we also, I'm just thinking about the letter grade, what if we gave a letter grade as far as the funding? So meaning that if you do not get enough funding, then the funding would say, hey, we get this amount of funding for this. So as it relates to the funding that goes to the schools here, if we were to grade the funding overall with the policy in the funding department, what score would they get?
It's great input. Thank you very much. And it's like we were talking about, if you see a letter grade and you drill down and you want to be able to understand what comprises, what makes up that letter grade. We've heard a couple interesting examples tonight, new ones in fact, about what should be those indicators, what should be those components that bubble up to a single letter grade, and how can we display those and make them very understandable for parents. I want to ask a little bit about elementary and middle school specifically. We talked about high school and some of those readiness indicators when students are about to leave, graduate, and go on about the rest of their lives. We want to make sure that they are ready to be successful in the pathway that they choose. Let's think about elementary. Let's think about middle school, those younger students. I'm interested to hear a little bit more from this group about some of the indicators that should matter or could matter to parents and families across the state that could be considered as a component of a letter grade system. Are there ideas about that in the room? I haven't heard much about that tonight. Other thoughts or ideas? I know we've got some folks kind of thinking. Is he thinking paces? Yes, ma'am. We're going to bring you a microphone. If you would just state your name, then go ahead and get started.
I was going to use my teacher voice, Lori Phillips, MSCS. Just wondering and curious, I'm just glad to know that I'd much rather see the letter grade versus the ES, MS, NMS, because I witnessed how parents did not understand what those the letters actually meant. And so we would have parents come at the beginning of the school year to find out that their child had been retained. So for that, I am super excited about the letter grading. However, when you have parents at home that, to the gentleman behind me, to his point, that want to help their children, and you may go to the teacher and say, hey, I know my child received a C or a D, what do I need to help them with? If we could be just a little bit more explicit as we are with testing. So if we say, just say your language arts, what specifically this 9-week did my child not master, in layman's terms for parents, so that they can better, if someone in the parent, or if they wanted to do an outside tutor, although we are providing those services, or if someone in the community or older sibling wanted to help, in layman's terms for our parents, how could we really break that down so they'll know where their child is not mastering or what they are mastering to better help us so we can strengthen that homeschool connection?
Thank you for that comment. I appreciate that. That was really good. Others who want to comment, jump in tonight, please feel free to raise your hand. We'll bring a microphone to you. Thinking about those indicators, those components of a calculation and what could or should be there. We've got some of the examples on the screen. I'm also interested in hearing what should not be there. If that's something on your mind, we can kind of take it both directions. I see you down here. We'll bring a microphone to you, ma'am. If you would please state your name, and then I'll go ahead and start your timer when you start.
Yes, my name is Keisha Allen Rogers from the Family Engagement Office. I'm an advisor in the office. You said some thoughts of indicators of elementary, maybe middle schools. Have we considered the liberal arts, getting a grade maybe for that? I know we talk a lot about the academics, but we have some kids so talented in other areas that we don't consider. And I think it's good, like some schools are really good with their music program, with their art program. Maybe considering it as an indicator to add.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much for those comments. And that's consistent. We've heard some things like that before when it comes to the, we know we love English language arts. We know we love math. What about everything else? And that included science and social studies, as well as some of the things that you pointed out in your comment, ma'am. So thank you for that. Other folks who want to chime in tonight, feel free to raise your hand. I want to hear from you about kind of the components or the indicators that could or should be considered. Yes, sir, I see you up there. We're going to bring you a microphone. Please state your name. Go ahead and get started when you're ready.
How you doing? My name is Justin Wilson. I'm a family and community engagement specialist. I work in a middle school, and with the middle school question that you asked from the input of a middle school person that's inside, I think one of the things is the human resource. As far as when you grade a school, do we have the proper resources as far as people within the school to assist? Because if you're graded low, are we influencing those students by having, like, I guess when you have a regular class and if you have 25 students, I feel like if we're already being graded low, we should have resources of an extra aide or someone else to be able to assist while doing those class works, those assignments. Because sometimes we're in those settings and a kid may not be up to par. And instead of the teacher redirecting him, if we have those resources and assets in that room to kind of keep them functioning and aware, then you can help bring everything back up and move that student.
Very good. Thank you so much, Mr. Wilson. Other input, comments for consideration, other questions that you would like to pose to us or ideas you have. I see you right here. We're going to bring you a microphone, Deirdre, if you would. If you would, please, ma'am, state your name and then go ahead and get started.
Latetris Wilson. I work for Tennesseans for Student Success. I don't see anything around like discipline. I know like as a former elementary teacher, we had a lot of innovative ways on discipline. Like we did not really like suspend. So what about something around like discipline, like for the schools that do not have like a high like suspension rate or something?
There we go. Short and sweet and to the point. I love it. Thank you very much. Other comments, other considerations that we should carry forward in this discussion. I mentioned that we've got 10 total. I think I mentioned that we have 10 total town halls. I think this is the fourth one. Starting to lose track a little bit of where I have been. And I know I'm in Memphis now, but as we continue over the next 3 or 4 weeks, we're going to hear from a lot of folks. And so I want to make sure if you've got an idea that you would like to carry forward in that period of engagement, that we can capture it here this evening. Others who want to chime in, provide some thoughts for consideration. I see you, sir. We'll bring you a microphone. If you would please state your name and then go ahead and get started when you're ready.
My name is Llewellyn Nelson. I'm presently a substitute teacher for Shelby County Schools. I see Dr. Whitelaw here. I already made my input at Bartlett last night, and I hope you recorded that. But I just have a I just have a question. I know the United States participate in the program for international students assessment. Is that factored into this grading system?
Could be, not currently, but could be. That's a very interesting component in kind of the international readiness assessment. Thank you, sir, for that comment. Other ideas? And I do appreciate you came twice. Thank you. That's right. We've got one more. Okay, yes, ma'am. We're going to bring you the microphone.
I'm just curious, since the state has actually kind of changed that third grade law that's causing a lot of angst with our parents, just curious, what would it look like if we added a bonus column or certain percentage points for students that attended tutoring regularly? And so, like, you know, if you have a 10-point system or something like that, where they may be right there on the cusp in a particular area, such as English language arts or mathematics. Well, right now we're talking about English language arts, but if they are attending tutoring regularly, like each particular quarter, then maybe it's, you know, 3.5 points per quarter for consistently attending tutoring. And so while parents may not understand everything, all of the nuances with the law, they can see, oh, my child is on the cusp of a C, or, you know, right a few points from a B. And if they have those 3.5 points, it'll take them over into helping them with their actual academic grade. But then it'll also be an incentive or encouraging, so to speak, for parents to make sure that their children are attending those tutoring opportunities.
Very thoughtful comment. Thank you, ma'am. And I think that kind of gets back to one of the things we were talking about, which is what would parents hope, expect to be included in the calculation of a letter grade? Certainly when we think about elementary, we know that the state has put a lot of focus, investment, hard work by teachers and students and families and tutors and more into that third grade reading component and the importance of proficiency in reading at that particular age. That's really a really thoughtful comment. And of course, there are some other components we could think about that might apply in a middle school space versus the elementary or high school space. Thank you for that comment. Others who would like to contribute some input tonight? We've heard a little bit about college and career indicators, ACT, and other types of pathways, and how students are faring in those chosen pathways. We've talked a little bit about the elementary school space. We actually heard about middle school as well. Other comments or other considerations when we think about things like you see on the board, things that definitely should be considered, things that should not be considered in your opinion. We'd love to hear from you. Yes? I'm looking for, oh, there you are. Can you say that again?
Certain categories will be?
That is a great question. The question was, have we determined what weights each category will hold? The answer for implementation this fall, we are in a co-creation space, so that's what this kind of public comment period is intended to collect and kind of generate, is recommendations from Tennesseans on how we should go about creating the calculation for implementation this fall. Yes, ma'am, I see you. Excuse me.
And I hate that because I probably missed it because I came in a few minutes late, so I do apologize. But did we talk about a timeline? So Dr. Tankson talked about the weights, but I would love to know the timeline. So
yes, ma'am. I'm going to put this one back up here if you want to take a picture of it. Yes, we will be implementing this legislation for the very first time this fall. State report card is the annual kind of release of a lot of information to the public and taxpayers in Tennessee. The letter grades will appear on the state report card when it is released this fall. Even though this legislation was passed a while ago, this is the first time it will be rolled out. Yes, ma'am.
Pre-pandemic, when you all were discussing letter grades, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is a point of clarity for me. Wasn't the AF versus how we give letter grades in school. Our child is A, that's excellent, that's 90 to 100. But isn't A, as it relates to the school letter grade, on the bottom tier versus the top tier? So if you're an A as a school, that's not a good thing versus the F. I'm just asking. I know at one time they were talking about flipping them. And
Not quite. I don't think that's kind of where things landed. There was lots of conversation a number of years ago, like we're having tonight, about what are the things that should be included. Of course, when we think about kind of a report card ranking, A is good, and,
Right.
and F needs some help and needs some additional support.
So that's the same as this? This would be?
What we're really looking for is what should these letter grades convey, right? How can we wrap arms around our children based on their grades on their report card and support them to learn and improve? It's the same kind of concept at the schoolhouse community.
Right, so for clarity, I'm saying, so we're discussing making sure they're aligned to just like the letter grades in school on the report card.
It could be, yes, ma'am. We are discussing kind of in a white space scenario, and so it's we're not necessarily showing something to react to, for an example. But to answer your question directly, A versus B versus C versus D, there's no kind of flipping, I guess, as you were mentioning, that A would be a bad thing.
Right, okay.
Or that F couldn't necessarily mean a bad thing. We really want to make sure that this is mobilizing supports for schools. And I think when you think about this legislation, it calls for that rating system. It does not also then require additional supports. And so I think from our agency's perspective, we're thinking about ahead of this rolling out, when those letter grades are applied, what are some of the things that we could do that are not required in state law to support schools and school communities and improving in the way that they want to? Others who have comment to share this evening? I am trusting that we are not signing up online. I haven't checked that file in a minute, but I will in just a second. Others who want to contribute, feel free to raise your hand. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry. So I know I was talking about the report card as in the report card in the school, but I'm also thinking about we need buy-in from everyone, not just our teachers and administrators in central office, but like our parents and community. So going back to those points, as we think about how do they factor in on the school letter grade, if just say for instance, 46% of our students were to be in tutoring, attending tutoring. If we have 40% or some type of metrics for that, then that should help us get the bump to show that, hey, our parents are buying in, school leaders are buying in, we're really trying. So I don't know if that's a thing right now, but I think that should be considered, just your community and parent involvement.
Yes, ma'am. And I'm wrapping my brain around what you just said. It's kind of persistence, right? Like, are we seeing students persist through a tutoring support service or something like that? Is that an accurate depiction of what you're saying?
Not just from teachers.
Yes, ma'am.
Making sure our parents are being held accountable and they're contributing to the grade.
Gotcha.
I'm not just judging the school based on this. We have a part to play.
Yes, ma'am. I understand what you mean now. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I see your hand went up. Yep, we'll bring you the microphone.
I was thinking about when we get evaluated, we provide artifacts. So what about a little bit about what Dr. Phillips said about providing some support documentation? Is there any way that the schools can provide artifacts showing what they have done and the barriers that, if for instance they provide something in the beginning, these are the barriers that we have based on the information and the test scores and the data that we have in the past. Can we provide supporting artifacts and documents to show these are the things that we're doing, this is the money that we had, this is the things that we're doing, this is the parent participation, these are how many parents came to our meetings, this is what the various variables that we are facing in our district. What I think that letter grade, I think someone in here said it was going to be a flight type thing, what Dr. Whitelaw says. I'm thinking about some supporting documentation, like Dr. Phillips said, something to show, hey, it's a community effort. Parents, some responsibility for the parents as well. So.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much for that comment. I think we've heard a lot about that, both in terms of the lady's comment before about generating input from lots of different stakeholders. I wish I could bring you on a town hall tour with me, because that's really exactly what we're trying to do, and we're trying to provide lots of opportunities for people to engage. Your comment, ma'am, about, can we provide the whole story? Can we do some effort to show kind of a total picture, not just the single letter grade, but all the other things that are happening in the schoolhouse community? That comment's very consistent with things that we're hearing as we go across the state and hear from lots of different stakeholders. So I appreciate you contributing that comment. I see two hands. I know, Dr. Whitelaw, I saw yours up first. I don't know, Derje, if you can reach the microphone to Angela here, and then we'll come to you, sir, next. We'll bring the microphone to you. Go ahead.
So let me go back. So this may just be my lack of clarity. I know it comes out in the fall. Can you all track for me, if it comes out in the fall, when would we know how each indicator is weighed? And then I know that you all are receiving feedback. So are you all going to, and I guess the question, who's actually looking at it to then look at all of our comments, look at all of our statements, and make the adjustments? Yeah, so I know that these are the measures.
Yes, ma'am.
But how are each weighed, the weight of each? And then I think my next question would be, as you're going around for the town hall meetings and taking this feedback, since the scores are slated, since the grades are slated to come this fall, then who's actually maybe making tweaks, or we're just saying, hey, these are tweaks that we can make in the future?
Great question. So this public town hall tour will continue through, it's the week of Labor Day holiday on Monday. We've got a few town halls that same week. That will kind of conclude the public town hall period. After that, the department is going to convene working groups, diverse working groups. And when I say diverse, I mean stakeholder kind of perspectives. We want to hear from teachers. We want to hear from parents. We want to hear from superintendents. We want to hear from legislators and elected officials. There have been county commissioners, school board members who have kind of thrown up their hands and said, I want to be involved in this process moving forward and take a look at all of the public comment generated to kind of make the sausage with us together. And so that is the period, that is the part of the work that will come after the public town hall period. We are on a tight timeline to roll out those letter grades this fall, but the department will be convening working groups to actually kind of delve through the public comment and together co-create with us the types of things you're mentioning, which is weighting or prioritization, things that will kind of be considered versus things that might not. Yes, sir, I see you. We're going to bring another microphone down to you, ma'am, in just one moment. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you again, Ms. Crawford, for this opportunity. We're not going to actually know how this is going to work until it's rolled out. So after this is rolled out, and there's going to be a lot of actions and reactions, does the department have any plans to conduct these kind of meetings to get feedback from the community of how it is working?
I think we want to engage you every step of the way. And I should say, I mean, even though this is the first time we are implementing this law and the first time it will be posted on some report card, the story of how we support schools and students and teachers and everyone who kind of goes into the schoolhouse community to help support learning, that's going to happen all the time. And we want to engage with people not only on this issue, but all the issues that we're working on, all those pieces of legislation. So yes, sir, we will definitely be kind of checking in following the implementation of this law to hear feedback from the community, and would invite you to participate in that. Yes, sir, I think you're next. Yes, sir, please go ahead.
So I guess I want to go back to all the work that was done previously. Does the department have the ability to take all the metrics and all the data and all the work that was done back in the 18 time frame and run it today with today's data, and maybe just use that as a comparison to say, okay, this school was a B, and then look at some underlying metrics? Does the department have the ability to do that? And if so, are they doing that? If not, or if they do have the ability and they're not doing it, why? That's one question, I guess.
Data modeling, essentially,
Yeah,
I think is what
data
you're talking about.
modeling, yeah.
Yes, we have the ability to do that.
So is that being done to to give a preliminary assessment?
The preliminary assessment in terms of a rollout of letter grade has not happened. However, what we have done is really kind of look through the calculations using numbers of years of data to be able to determine if this will create a letter grade system that is meaningfully different. And I think what we are seeing is that when we look at the data, no matter what year it has been since the legislation has passed, we're seeing great swath of what an A might represent when you think about a particular sub-indicator. And so as an example, if you think about academics proficiency or growth, an A might represent a school that is at the top of that range, but an A might also represent the school at the bottom of that range or any shade in between. And so that's some of the things that we want to take a look at and kind of hear from the public to inform not only the work that was done a number of years ago. It was a lot of work, it was a lot of hard work, but how do we move forward in rolling out for the very first time a piece of legislation in as fair a way as possible that provides parents and families the information that they would assume or expect to be represented by that letter grade.
Okay, and I guess just one other thing, just looking at the system, I'm going to throw something out here. I don't know that you can look at every school across the state in the same category. And I'll say this. MSCS deals with challenges that we in the suburbs can't even dream of. So they're playing a different game than we are. And so if you look at the urban districts versus the suburban districts versus the highly or very rural districts. So a district like Perry County, for instance, they have challenges that we don't have in the suburbs, they don't have in MSCS. And so, I guess when you're looking at it, I almost wonder if there's some advantage to categorizing your large districts, Knox County, Shelby County, Hamilton County, Metro Nashville, and kind of your urban districts, have them in a category where weights might be a little different than compared to the suburbs, because it's not, I don't think an A or a B from one school to the other, when they're dealing with challenges, again, I freely admit, MSCS deals with things that we can't even imagine in the suburbs. And so I've got to think that there's got to be a way to categorize and maybe have different weights by different types of, or different categories of district. So like the suburbs, for instance, we might line up more with like Wilson County, Williamson County, Sumner County. That would maybe be a good comparison. Where your very rural counties, Perry County, Houston County, maybe they're in a category, and then you have your large urban districts. Just a suggestion, because again, I think if you look across the board, your inputs are going to be completely different looking from one category to the next.
Thank you for that comment. And that's kind of consistent with what we heard last night, actually, at the town hall we did at Bartlett High School. It was, the premise of the question was, are we comparing apples to apples, or are we comparing apples to bananas, to tangerines, to grapes, to any other fruit? And so kind of the notion about how do you ensure as much of an apples to apples comparison in this process has been brought up a number of times. And it's a fair point, and something we're really interested in exploring and kind of hearing more input on, in addition to some of those other indicators that could be contributive, not only just kind of the categorization, I guess, type comment that you made, but also what are those indicators that would make up a letter grade for an elementary versus middle versus high school. I see you, ma'am. Let us bring you a microphone, please. Oh, you were next. I'm so sorry. Please go ahead, Lori.
So just a question here for academics versus growth. So we know at some of maybe the suburban schools, the academics may, as far as achievement, may outweigh the growth, because sometimes you can actually top out and you don't grow as fast versus, our district where our growth may, we may grow leaps and bounds, but the achievement we may not see exceeding grade level expectations or meeting them as much, right? So if we factor this into the grading system, I would just ask, because on a given day, we looked at our 20-day reports or our month, the number of students that leave, our attrition rates of students, not teachers, but students, is so high. So if we're looking at progress of students in a school, I'm just wondering how that would impact, because certain schools with numerous apartment homes around, the attrition rates are so high. So how would that possibly impact our school grade that's given if we're tracking the progress of those students in a school where they may attend 5, 6, 7 different schools in a year.
Thank you for that comment. And I think a couple of folks have pointed out tonight kind of the growth and proficiency deliberation, right? Like the discussion around how those two things interact, how they could or should wait as we carry this conversation forward towards implementation. We had you up here with your hand up, ma'am. We're going to bring you a microphone. Did I see another hand down here? Did y'all have a hand up? No? Okay. We'll come to you, ma'am.
Okay, I just wanted to see about the chronically out of school, if that is something that can be looked at as far as, I don't know if we could not account it, but the way that it's weighted, because if maybe looking at why the student is out, and judging it that way, like if certain things would automatically, if there is a terminal illness or a sickness, sickle cell, lupus, depending on what the diagnostic is, that child is going to be out more possibly, that it be weighed differently. And that child may not end up on the chronically out. So the way that it is weighed, instead of an absent is an absent and it counts, whether it's an excused or unexcused. So seeing how that is weighed out, that would help the parents. Some parents may not have the resources to afford medical care for a child that they may keep home that may have a tooth problem, where they may not have dental insurance, and they may be waiting until their next paycheck to get that child in. They don't have the funds right then to get the child seen, and the child is in pain. They don't want to send the child in school because the child is in pain, so they keep them home. They have a medical problem, but then they're counted. So if we could kind of see a way that we can weigh that out so it won't weigh so heavily on the school, and not make it completely kind of like it's a heavy weight on the school if the students are not there, but looking at it and then putting some parameters around it to say, okay, this incident, the school could say that it could qualify and not count as a chronic.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that comment. Something we've heard related to that is kind of the notion of unexcused versus excused absences. Thank you very much for that comment. Others who would like to contribute this evening? We've been here for just a little over an hour. I want to make sure that we're being respectful of your time. We're going to be here till 7, but I want to make sure that if we have more group discussion that we can go ahead and get that in. Others who want to provide some comment or question for us to consider as we move forward? Yes, ma'am. Let us bring you a microphone. It's going to be coming down right behind you.
It's the timeline again. Can you state again what the timeline when the letter grades will actually be published?
Yes, ma'am. So in the fall every year is when the state report card gets published online. That is going to kind of be the house, the home for where this letter grade information will live. That will come in November. So late fall this year will be the first time that we implement this legislation. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Just a couple months away.
So will schools know the weights before it hits? Will we get information before the letter grades hit?
Yes, we will. Once this kind of public comment period and the working groups, as I mentioned, once there is kind of a decision on what the calculation will be, there will absolutely be communication from our agency, not just to schools and districts, but just publicly in general, to ensure that we communicate that back out before the publication of the report card. Others who would like to provide public comment? Can schools appeal the letter grade? In terms of accountability, when we think about accountability data, there is some data that kind of contributes into an accountability system. It could be the data that contributes to an A through F letter grade system. Some data is appealable and some data is not. It gets kind of technical, but I'm more than happy to kind of give you some information maybe after this about like what are the specific pieces of data that a district may appeal. As a broad stroke kind of comment, an appeal for certain types of data might include a scenario where a calculation has essentially left, an error has left out a student or students from a particular indicator. And so there are appeal options for the data, some of the data that would kind of roll up into an accountability system, but also potentially into this A through F letter grade rating system as well.
Schools that may have, and I'm no slight, but you have certain schools that may have maybe one exceptional class or a SPED class, and then you have another school that may have 4 or 5, and not everyone is portfolioed. And so I'm just thinking about that growth that could hurt, although you have different levels. You may have STEP, you may have, your 2 resource classes and functional skills. So I'm just saying not all of them may be portfolioed, especially your resource students, but they won't, perform as well as far as the growth. And I'm just wondering how that would factor in, or if that were to happen, and you could just possibly, have that argument, so to speak, or try to appeal that.
Yes, ma'am.
If for sure, because it's going to come.
That's
so
right.
I'm just saying.
And I think we've heard a couple of different folks tonight kind of point out the notion of topping out, right? When you hit the top of a scale, then where do you go from there? And how would topping out in any particular indicator contribute to the letter grade that would be generated in this calculation? So thank you for that comment. Others? All right, last stand. Here we go. Let's hear
I
it.
just wanted to know if a school were to implement the community school model, will be bringing in resources into the schools to help with the non-academic barriers. Could that school receive a higher score grading or so many points added?
That is an excellent point and public comment. Thank you for that. I think we've heard the notion of bonus points and kind of additional considerations that could bump up the components or the indicators that go into the letter grade. Or bump it up a point or two. I hear you. Support. Would you all like to provide some comment here? We'll bring you a microphone. I got you. It's coming.
Again, I want to make sure that everyone shares their artifacts and what's all the resources that are provided and that is documented. So I think someone, I can't remember, stated, can they appeal it? It should be, some of those variables should be allowed in certain circumstances. I don't know how subjective that is, but objective, I'm sorry. But I do think some supporting documents should be allowed when you're trying to appeal.
Thank you very much for that comment. I see you right behind her, Derja. Thank you very much. Go ahead and state your name for me one more time.
Keisa Allen Rogers. I just thought of an indicator that I don't know if we thought about, kind of going back to the gentleman up here when he talked about, since this was based on 2018 as opposed to where we are not now, and how we consider the crisis we're in as far as an unemployment of teachers. People are leaving the education field for whatever reason. And so a school that has a fully functioning staff as opposed to a school that has maybe 10, 12, 15 teachers out, we have substitute teachers in there. Are we looking at those indicators how you're not comparing apples to apples anymore? Because, of course, those kids in those schools are going to do better because they have a certified teacher in there that's there every day, as opposed to a substitute where they may have 2 or 3 days here, and then you have somebody else 2 or 3 days, then you have somebody else. How we considered that, because now after COVID, a lot of things have changed, as opposed to when we did this in 2018.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that comment. The legislation doesn't account for things like that. However, that's an excellent piece of input that we will carry forward in the discussion on how to calculate the letter grade. Others who would like to provide comment? We've got a little bit more time together this evening. Teacher voice, and then we'll come to you, ma'am. I saw your hand.
I was going to try it. Okay, so we were just conversing here, and so we hear November when Dr. Tankston asked about the release date, the timeline. And so if it's November and we're talking about just mental health, stress, we're already having a teacher shortage, you know, you think about all those things. And so if we, just like the data that just came out today, we're excited, right? We're seeing increase. We're moving the needle. However, then if we were to get this bomb, so to speak, in November, where this same school that's having these celebratory events and everything, and then, oh, you found out you were a D or an F. So if it could be embargoed, I mean, I know November, but like right after Labor Day or something, to give schools a heads up so that they could prepare, they could push back or appeal, have time, instead of us finding out potentially, and I don't know the strategy or the plan, but to potentially find out when media finds out, when everyone else finds out, how fair is that truly to those who are trying when we're already facing a nationwide teacher shortage and people wanting to pull students out, you know, already left and right.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that comment. We're gonna bring a microphone up to you, ma'am. And yes, we want to make sure that our districts and our schools have a chance to review this data before it is published. And so that is a commitment we are going to make and plan to follow through with ahead of publication of that letter grade. I saw you, ma'am, put your hand up. I feel like I saw another hand go up, but I'm not sure if I did. We'll hear from you. If you would state your name one more time for us.
Okay, it's Tamika. Sorry for my voice again. I went to a concert last night, so the voice is gone. But I was thinking about a variable that we can include. What about if schools, especially like middle schools, meet their numbers as relates to getting students to attend the school? So say, for instance, if our goal was 800 students and we actually got 890 students, then that could be a variable I was thinking about that we can use if you actually have students actually enrolling into your schools, excited about going to your schools, that being a variable, and then scratching altogether the chronic absenteeism, that one, because of the students that are transit, they're homeless. We're dealing with so many issues where I believe that one should be scratched because that it's really out of the school's control as relates to that. Another thing that I was thinking about as relates to middle school, I know we have third grade initiative and we have our second grade, but how ready are students for middle school? So I was thinking, I don't want to say that because we're kind of sick of testing, but just to be honest, but how do we, the way that we look at, okay, how many parent involvement, how is your PTO, how many parents are really involved? That could be one that we could use. How do students actually attend? I know we're knocking about being absent, but what about the ones that are 80% attendance? Students are coming to school, that being a variable that we look at across the state. That could be a variable for middle school and high school, because as they get older, they kind of can like play the game where they can kind of come or not come. So I was thinking about that as a variable that we can utilize, as well as teacher performance, like the TIM variable. Could that be used? If teachers are meeting the mark as far as the TIM goes, their TIM evaluation scores, and you have teachers that are level 3, 4, and 5, could that be a variable that we utilize within our calculation of looking at how well schools fare, okay, as opposed to what they're not doing? Because whenever you're looking at what people are not doing, we tend to not do that more. But if we look at, okay, attendance rate 80% and above, we're looking at that. We're not looking at chronic, we're looking at attendance. All right, you're meeting your numbers. All right, how many students are coming to your school? And that drives motivation about really getting teachers and students hyped about coming to your school. You're looking at, are students eager to attend your school? What are you doing? Those variables could be some of the things that we add into our calculation. We have students with special needs. Maybe removing that subgroup as a, I'm not saying removing it as it doesn't mean anything, but as far as someone said, meeting and exceeding expectation, if that's going to be a variable, like some schools are heavily populated with students that are being wrongly identified or being identified, right? So the kids are coming in at a low rate, especially in middle school. They're already coming 2 and 3 grades behind because we were virtual for some time. So some of them only saw middle school 1 year, and then they went on to high school. So you think about that, there was no way that we can really judge to see how ready they were. There wasn't a pre-test that we gave. There wasn't a post-exit test that we gave to see even if they were ready for high school. So thinking about those variables when we're talking about calculation.
Thank you very much. The readiness for middle school, readiness for high school. That was very thoughtful. You've had a lot in that comment, actually. Thank you very much. All right, others who want to provide comment this evening so that we can continue and carry forward in our discussion. I appreciate that y'all have been here for a long time this afternoon. This has been a really good conversation. I'll do final call for comment in the room. Very good. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and adjourn. We are going to stick around just in case there's anybody who walks through the door for the last 10 minutes. Seriously, deeply, thank you for this engagement. I want to make sure to put up one more slide because this conversation is not ending. As I mentioned, we are going to collect public comment from lots of folks for a long time. We are also collecting public comment from this email address that you see up here, schoollettergrades@tnedu.gov. You are welcome to send us an email once, twice, 3 times. You are welcome to tell all your friends about it. We really want to hear from you. We want to hear all of the opinions and perspectives from stakeholders across the state. So again, thank you very much for being here this evening. Have a very safe drive home. Enjoy your dinner. We'll hear from you soon.